I'm Linda Jan Lewis. I represent the Texas NAACP. I'm part of the NAACP National Legal Defense Fund. I'm part of our voter protection group. I've been here since 8 o'clock this morning, and so my comments are not about Harris or Dallas County. They are about, I run the NAACP voter hotline during early voting for Central Texas, and because of my long-term involvement in voting, I receive calls from all over Texas. So I want to tell you something.
Ms. Lewis, so I could just, for clarification, you are testifying on behalf of the Texas NAACP.
Yes, I am.
And are you for, against, or neutral on the bill?
I am against the bill.
Thank you.
I am.
Please proceed.
Definitely against the bill. First of all, this bill, we've heard a lot about what's happening to the poor poll watchers. This bill is an assault, and I would assent it's a racist assault on baby boomers. The people who work in elections are usually retired educators, retired government workers, retired military people, people who have the time to put in 18, 20-hour days so that our democracy can work. So this bill is going to provide free range for people to come to insult, to intimidate, to watch over, and to actually put in jeopardy the baby boomers, that most of the election workers in Texas are 60 or over, the baby boomers who are trying to do their part to pay for what life has given them in the state of Texas. And I just want to report to you some things that have been reported to me that have already been reported to the National Legal Defense Fund, the Brennan Center, the Texas Commission for Civil Rights. In McLennan County, we've had a series going back at least 6 years. There are 5 early voting locations in McLennan County. One is on the grounds of historically black Paul Quinn College that moved to Dallas, but that property is the early voting location in the heart of the black community. The presiding judge there is one of our legacies. In the NAACP, we try to foster the next generation. Her mother was an NAACP president, and she was the presiding judge at the early voting location. The judge currently is there. Approximately 6 years ago, there were problems at the early voting location, and then she did what the election code required. She actually called the police, and had a candidate removed, a Republican candidate removed, because he refused and defied her. He was inside the polling place, shaking hands and soliciting voters. As a result of that, there has been an all-out war, an assault on McLennan County's only African-American election presiding judge. Is my time up, or?
Your time's up, Ms. Lewis, but you'll have the opportunity to have some questions asked. If I could, though, before I do that, you introduce yourself. I think I heard you say Linda Jan Lewis. Is that J-A-N?
J-A-N-N. It's an old Texas name.
It's a great Texas name. Would you be okay if we amend your certification to show your middle name, Linda Jan Lewis? Is that, you're fine with that?
I'm
okay.
Fine with that.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony here. We're going to get that thing buzzing at us, and I'm going to recognize Mr. Busey for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lewis, would you finish telling us the rest of your testimony, please?
Yes. What I'd like to say is that we have had in Waco, Texas, and McLennan County what we call poll watcher overseer syndrome. One afternoon, the presiding judge is an African-American female. The associate judge, and that represents the Democrats, the associate judge is a Republican female. One afternoon when the voting was a little slow, one of the African-American voting workers went into the kitchen. They're in a big city facility where there's a commercial kitchen. One of the workers went into the kitchen. There were no voters there. It was just a slow period to take her medications. The poll watcher took it upon herself to go into the kitchen to see what the election worker was doing without any voters there. That's just symbolic of all the things that have happened with poll workers in McLennan County. If there is a Caucasian, a white voter, the poll watchers stay where they are and they don't move. But if there is an African American or a Hispanic voter, then the poll watchers are all over the place. We've had the instance of a poll watcher raffling through the papers of the election judge, actually looking at the names of who signed in and what is going on. We've had poll watchers who have gone up while a voter is being assisted, telling the voter, you don't want to vote like that. You really don't want to vote for them. It's not an issue of the voters being protected by the poll watchers. We have a problem where we need the election workers who make less than a living wage, less than $15 an hour, being protected by the poll watchers. They ganged up on the presiding judge. At one day, there were 5 poll watchers from the Republican Party because they needed to come to see what was happening over there with all those black people because they were voting. The other issue is that in our community, the grandparents, Big Mama, a lot of grandparents bring their children because they want them to, and like me, they probably have some visual issues. They bring their grandchildren because they want them to see them voting. And during those times, the grandchildren sometimes assist their grandparents because they may have visual issues or they can't work the machine. If House Bill 6 is to pass, then we're going to criminalize children that are assisting with voting. I think that this vote does more harm for a problem that does not exist.
Ms. Lewis, I appreciate it. I appreciate your feedback and input. I, as you've heard me talk today, I share a lot of those concerns about this bill taking away the right to remove a watcher who's, showing signs of being out of line and intimidating. So I appreciate your input and your insight for us today.
Yes. I'd like to just close by saying that there were so many complaints in 2020 from the Republican Party about this one predominantly black voting station that the Secretary of State sent in an auditor, and the Secretary of State's auditor called for sanctions for the poll watchers because they were aggressive, they were intimidating, and they were racist.
That was the most recent election?
That was in the November 2020 election. Also in today's Texas Talking Points memo, there's a story about it by Tierney Sneed, and it lists some of the things I've talked about tonight. There also are some issues in The Guardian about what's going on. The issue is that election workers need more money, more assistance, and more support. I don't see why we need poll watchers to have more rights than the people who have sworn and are dedicated to make our democracy work.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Busey. Any questions for Mrs. Lewis? Chair recognizes Vice Chairman Gonzalez.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis, for being here and waiting all day to testify. I know you have a long history of service to Texas and McLennan County. I think you spoke briefly about your background. Can you tell us a little bit more about what your background is in working with elections in McLennan County, please?
Yes, I'm actually an Austin expatriate. I was in that early group of students at UT in 1965. I worked I didn't go to the LBJ school, but I went to the Bob Bullock School of Government. He mentored me, and when Mark White was Secretary of State, I was on his commission to look at how we can improve voting. I worked for the first Republican governor in 100 years, Governor Bill Clements, and I also worked for Governor Mark White. In my duties in those two offices, it was my job to oversee on behalf of the governor, the Secretary of State's legislation and its budget. And so I've been involved with voting since I registered to vote in 1965 when Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act. And because I was the state's first African American elections administrator, I run the voter hotline whenever there's voting going on, whether it is early voting or election day. I get calls from Central Texas, and I also get calls from people around the state. So I did get some calls from Houston and from Dallas on questions about elections.
And you mentioned, you gave some examples, and as far as like how you mentioned brown and black voters, how they're treated differently, and that you've seen, right, as far as...
I've seen it, and it's also been reported to me. I'm the person that takes the statements and the affidavits, and I form it, send it on to the National Legal Defense Fund, the Civil Rights Project, the ACLU, the people who are involved in coalition with us trying to protect voting.
And who all knows about these problems that are happening over there?
I'm sorry.
So who all knows about these problems that are happening over there?
In McLennan County, we report them through the NAACP National Legal Defense Fund. We report it at the state level. We are in close partnership with the Civil Rights Project, the Brennan Center for Justice, and we also we have reported enough problems to the Secretary of State's office, such that if we call, they know our names. I tease our election judge, presiding judge, that I called for a question and I said, "This is McLennan County," and they said, "Oh, Anita, yeah, we know." It's a constant issue because frequently in McLennan County, the presiding judge has been given information by the election administrator that's contrary to what's in the election code. So we've had to arm ourselves by keeping up about what's in the code.
We've heard some testimony today from several witnesses that have said that if this bill were to pass, that it would be very hard for polling locations to be able to hire and retain election workers, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely, because I'm the election lady. I've had, just because of the publicity of this bill, of these bills, and what's going on, I've had numerous phone calls from people saying, if this passes, I'm not going to work. I had to explain to a couple of people that the bill has not passed. There are people who are saying they're not going to work in the March 1st local elections because at $10 an hour, they don't want to be in a position to have to pay a fine or to go to jail if they make a mistake.
Can you tell us a little bit, can you tell us about the report issued by Dr. Jack Hill about these systemic problems that are happening in McLennan County, please?
Yes, Dr. Jack Hill is a retired college professor who's on our local NAACP voter team, on our civic engagement and voter team. And he was a poll watcher at the Quinn campus site. And so he observed that if there were several things, that voters came in who didn't, and poll watchers came in who refused to wear masks, who were loud, who were dismissive and disrespectful of the presiding judge, who got into arguments with the judge as she was trying to instruct them that they were disrupting the polling place. He also observed as a poll watcher that if the voter was Black or Hispanic, that the poll watchers were all over them. If there was a Caucasian voter, the poll watchers didn't even pay attention to what was going on. We are not yet a colorblind society, and certainly not in McLennan County, Waco, Texas.
Thank you. Thank you for your service, these years of service.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? And Ms. Lewis, thank you for coming to testify, and sorry for the delay, but I sincerely appreciate your service to the state, and that's quite an impressive history that you have in elections, and thank you for your commitment to the process.
Thank you, and I thank you for what you do, because what we do allows you people to be here to pass laws, and I hope that you will pass some laws that will, baby boomers, we are the people who run elections. Don't send us to jail because a poll watcher says that they think we did something.
Well, pray for us. We're working on it. Thank you.